Welcome to JGod Gaming. In today's video I'll be focusing on the best setup for Call of Duty WWII. This video will include the monitor versus the TV, your controller button layout and settings, other menu settings, as well as your internet, and speakers versus headset versus earbuds. First up is monitors versus TVs. The biggest difference between the two is the input lag. For TVs in general, there's usually a 20 to 40 millisecond input lag. As well as in monitors, it's usually between 1 and 10. And 10 is like the worst. That's like atrocious for a monitor. Average monitor, you can get about 4 or less. In a game like Call of Duty, reaction is such a big difference, so that if you're playing on the worst end of the spectrum when it comes to a TV with 40 milliseconds and someone has 1, 40 milliseconds is a huge difference when the average reaction time is probably around 300 milliseconds. That's more than a 10% difference, so that part's huge. So I definitely recommend a monitor, usually the 24 to 27 inch range. You only need 60 Hz for consoles, and obviously if you're on PC you already have a monitor, but in general for the console you'll notice a huge difference. Before going and making the investment, I would recommend just hooking your console up to your standard monitor you have at your house and see the difference. You should notice an immediate difference even with just a generic monitor. Next up is your controller. Nowadays a lot of people have fancy controllers, not a huge percentage of the population because some of them get pretty pricey. The number 1 and number 2 on the market are, most people would consider a SCUF and an Xbox Elite if you're playing on Xbox. There are some other tools out there to help that are a little bit more affordable. One, for example, is the Cronus Max Pro, which means you can hook up any controller to any system. So that's a benefit if you prefer Xbox over PlayStation. Another thing is trigger stops. Those actually help to speed up your trigger finger so that you can actually line up quicker shots with your semi-auto weapons. Control freaks, obviously those are going to increase your accuracy. And then the last thing is the strike pack. This one attaches to your controller and it acts like a SCUF, so you get those extra paddles on the bottom, which in one way they can actually be beneficial because you can use one to jump, or you can use one to dive to the ground, specifically in this game. And you're wondering how people are aiming still while they're jumping. This is how they're doing it. Well, it's at least one of the ways. There's another way that I'm going to get into right now with the controller layout and setting. So when we go into our controller settings, the first thing we're going to look at is the flipped setting. And what this does is it rearranges your trigger finger with your tactical and your lethal with your aim down sights, and it maneuvers those a little bit. The benefit in this is it reduces your trigger so that it'll act like those trigger stops. So it actually allows you to spam that semi-auto as quick as possible versus holding the trigger and releasing. It's a lot quicker. Next up is the actual layout setting. The one we'll look at is tactical. What the benefit of tactical is, it switches your R3 with your actual crouch so that you can actually dive and do drop shots with your R3. Next one is bumper jumper. This one mixes your L1 so that you can actually mantle things or jump. So this one you could jump shot while aiming. It modifies that a little bit. There's bumper jumper tactical, which incorporates the crouching as well. So you can melee with circle, and then you have your still aiming down sights as well as jumping at the same time. And the last one I recommend is stick and move. With stick and move, you're able to use R3 as your jump or mantle so that you're able to jump shot and keep your finger on the joystick while you're aiming down sights, which allows you to keep that accuracy as you jump in. The next thing we'll look at is all the other menu settings. So in this one, you have a horizontal and vertical sensitivity. I recommend keeping those the same, but experiment with them. The lowest I'd recommend going is 4 unless that's just too hard for you to manage, and the highest is probably 6 unless you're just an all-out aiming god. You're also going to want to make sure you leave your aim assist on. I know some people are in the mood that they want to disable that, but if you're on console using controller, there's no reason you should disable that. Next up is actually your actual safe area. With the safe area, you want to make it as small as possible. It doesn't actually affect the screen, it just affects your HUD, so it brings everything tighter to the center, as you can see on the screen now, and it allows it so you don't have to look away from the middle of the screen as far as if it was in the corner. And the last thing you're going to want to do on the screen is just disable that motion blur, just because it has a tendency to kind of misplace objects and make you think that you're missing targets that you actually are hitting. When it comes to your internet, the first recommendation I would do is make sure you have an Ethernet cable connected so you're not going wireless off of Wi-Fi. This tends to lead to inconsistent connection, which will cause lag in the long run. The next thing you're going to want to do is actually test your connection. So there's a couple different ways to do that. There's a speed test that most people have done or seen or familiar with because it's the #1 way to test. And then the other one is to actually check your buffer bloat and see what kind of grade you get. Based off that information, you know what kind of internet you're having and then what adjustments you can make within your router. There's actually 2 different ways to do this. There's one is use your router that you've been given. Some of them have more settings than others. And then if you're kind of restricted by the router that you have, you might want to go out and get a NetDuma. With this one is a NetDuma router, you're allowed to modify the settings much easier than just a stock router. But some of those stock routers are built in with some of these features that allow you to correct the buffer bloat and maybe check some of the other things that you might be having issues with. Last thing I want to talk about is speakers, headsets, and earbuds. When it comes down to it, a good set of earbuds will be just fine for this game. There are a lot of sounds that you won't pick up if you're just listening to your TV screen or your monitor that I would recommend getting either a headset or a good earbuds that will allow you to hear directional sound so that you can actually tell which way people are coming from, which people are shooting, or whatever the case is, so that you can actually adjust and then get the drop on them. And that's the end of the video. I'd like to know your thoughts or any questions or concerns down in the comments section. I will respond. If you did enjoy the video in any way, go ahead and click that like button. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.